So this is the ASUS ROG Flow X13. I apologize for the stuffy nose. I'm still getting over you know what, but the show must go on, and I was gonna review this by itself, right? Because it's, it deserves to be reviewed by itself. But then I thought more about it, and I'm like, we really need to compare this to the Z13 because both of these devices, even though their form factors are technically different, they kind of do the same thing. And they have sort of the same hardware with a few differences. And I figure if you're looking at one, you might be considering the other. Now the X13 is more of a traditional laptop. It's technically a convertible because the display can flip 360 degrees. And of course you could use it in a tablet format. Whereas the Z13 is more of your traditional two-in-one, something like the Surface Pro 8. You get a little tablet portion and then you have a Type key connector that hits the bottom. And then all of a sudden you have this two-in-one portable device. The other thing is the weight, right? This is 2.43 pounds and this is 2.87 pounds. But as soon as you connect the keyboard, this ends up being over 3 pounds and it's technically heavier. The port lineup is very, very similar, but you do get an extra HDMI port on the X13, which you do not on the Z13. So they both have two USB Type-C ports, one of them being inside of the proprietary connector. And then of course the other one is on the outside like this. But the one on the Z13 happens to be Thunderbolt 4 since it's using an Intel CPU, whereas the X13 is just, regular USB Type-C. They both have a USB-A port, and they both have a power button on the side with a fingerprint scanner embedded inside of it. Technically, the Z13 is thicker because as soon as you add the keyboard to it, you can see that the thickness is increased, and there's portions of the X13 which just looks significantly thinner. The typing experience is good on both of these devices, but it's obviously better on the X13. With the Z13, you have to use a type cover, and this is not as good as the newer Surface Pro 8 type covers. This reminds me of their earlier versions, so it works well. You can type okay, but there's just a lot of flex on the top of the keyboard. Even if you have it flat against the table, it's just not as comfortable as typing on something like this. You do have a slightly bigger touchpad. It also feels a lot more accurate on this guy. They're obviously still technically a little bit small, but if I had to use a touchpad, I would rather use the one on the X13. Now this does have a RGB keyboard, right? It changes different colors. You can't do per key RGB, but you can change the colors, whereas on the X13, you have just white lights. And quite frankly, as long as I have a backlight for my keyboard, that's all that really matters to me. I will say this though, the hinges on the X13, they're pretty good. Like when I have the laptop on the table, there's no major wobbling, but you pick this up and you can tell that the hinges are not as tight as I'd like them, because you could actually make this fall back. This is a little bit more common on convertibles just because it needs to flip 360 degrees, but I feel like these hinges could use a little bit more tightening. As for the designs, it comes down to personal preferences. Like this Z13 has more of a in-your-face gamer look. Like this little thing here lights up and you can see the motherboard inside, which I think looks super cool. Whereas the X13 just looks super clean. It has like this black, beautiful case with these lines going diagonally. You open it up, you can actually see the ROG logo on the right-hand side of the keyboard deck. It just feels a bit different. As for the displays, they're both 1920 by 1200. They're both using 16 by 10 aspect ratios, and they have the exact same panel. Like they're both 120 hertz. The brightness, the color accuracy is nearly identical. So no matter which device you go for, you're gonna have a very similar display experience. They both support touch. They both support pen input. I feel very comfortable designing or doing any sort of video work on this since the color accuracy is quite good. I don't think you should go for the 4K panel like the X13 offers one. I don't think it's worth the extra money. Like the display at 13 inches is just not big enough to really utilize 4K, but overall it's a fantastic panel. The camera, 720p on both devices. It looks okay. There's no difference. They're using the same camera sensor, but the Z13 has a second camera on the back, which is better at 1080p. It's not going to beat out an iPhone, but you do have a better sensor to use on the back. Now, performance is where things get very interesting because they share a lot of the similar specs like SSD size, RAM, and GPU RTX 3050 Ti, but the CPU is completely different. You buy the Z13, you're getting the i9 12900H from Intel. It's been power limited a bit just so that it can run properly in a chassis this thin, but if you buy the X13, you're getting a Ryzen 9 6900HS. if we're talking about single core and multi-core speeds, the Z13 always comes out on top. It's just the faster CPU in general. Same holds true if you're using any sort of creative applications. Regardless of whether you're using Photoshop, Premiere Pro, or even After Effects, the Z13 is going to perform better because it also utilizes QuickSync, which RDNA 2, as good as it is, it's just not utilized by these applications properly. However, when it comes to 3D work, it really doesn't matter which one you go for. It's just using the RTX 3050 Ti, and it performs very similarly on both of these devices. But the one area the X13 kind of comes out on top is gaming. It got slightly, and I mean a few frames per second more, better scores than the Z13. And the reason being is because this CPU in the 6900HS can run hotter longer than the 12900H. It's just a better optimized CPU due to its efficiency, right? Like this is a 6 nanometer piece of technology compared to the 10 nanometer that's inside of the 12900H. However, once you connect to the XG Mobile Connect, the Z13 comes out back on top because it no longer needs to use that 3050 Ti. So all the performance can be sucked up by that 12900H. It can run cooler, and the RTX 3080 Ti can take over in the GPU department. As for fan noise, they definitely get loud when it's on turbo mode. We're talking over 50 decibels. But since there's different profiles you can choose from, you can nerf the performance a little bit, and you can keep the fan noise around 40 decibels. Now, when it comes to sound, X13 is louder, even though the speakers are on the bottom compared to the side on the Z13, they just sound cleaner and get louder. The Z13 is not terrible, but they do sound a bit tinny. The other thing is they both use a similar power brick. It's 100 watts, it's fairly small, and it's USB Type-C. Internally, the X13 is just a lot easier to get into, but you can't really upgrade anything except for the NVMe SSD, which is a 2230, which is smaller than the traditional 2280s, and this has a swappable Wi-Fi card. The RAM is soldered onto the motherboard, and if you want to upgrade the drive on the Z13, there's a little slot right over here. Now, battery life is another area where the X13 is just so much better. That 6900HS processor is way more efficient, and I got over 9 hours of use on this guy compared to around 5 on the Z13. Now, here's the big thing. This X13 is $1599. Right? Whereas this Z13 is $1899. That is a $300 difference. And I don't think the Z13 is worth an extra $300 in terms of performance. Yes, it's technically the faster device, but at the expense of battery life, which the X13 excels. And I think for the amount of money you're spending, it just makes a lot more sense to go for the $1599 model. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're looking at the Surface Pro 8, I still think the Z13 is a better deal because a fully spec'd out Surface Pro 8 is well over $2,000, whereas this guy is just under. So if you have to have that 2-in-1 hybrid form factor, then yeah, get the Z13. But if you're choosing between both of these guys, I think the X13 is a better deal. I hope that answers a lot of your questions. If you have any more, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.